Good morning and welcome to Montgomery County Public Schools. We're going to get started with today's media briefing by introducing the President of the Board of Education, Ms. Carla Silvestri. Ms. Silvestri.
Good morning, buenos dias. As Chris stated, I am Carla Silvestri, President of the Board of Education, and we have a number of topics to talk with you here today. There are exciting things to talk about, such as the opening of schools, the welcoming of 164,000 students into our buildings and classrooms. We will also talk about complex things like attendance and ensuring equitable opportunities for all of our students. But before we can talk about these very important things, I want to address the difficult topic of the allegations of sexual harassment and bullying at one of our middle schools, and the repeated failure of the system to respond to complaints reported. We, the board, want to assure our staff, students, and families, and the community that we will determine what happened, and there will be accountability for any failures, either systemic or individual, that are identified. We think it's important for our community to know what is happening as a result of these allegations and when they can expect to hear the results of the investigation. The board has met with the external investigators and are confident that the team will conduct an independent, unbiased investigation. We have presented our deliverables to them, and they are reporting exclusively to the Board of Education. Jackson Lewis, the external investigators, will report any updates on the status of the investigation and its findings, like I said, directly to the board. It's important to understand the structure and scope of the investigation. There are actually two related investigations, or two lines of inquiry. These two inquiries will, by necessity, run on two different timetables. First, the team is investigating any potential failures by MCPS in connection with the promotion of Dr. Joel Bedelman to principal of Paint Branch High School. The board expects to receive a report of this first phase of the investigation by September 8th, 2023. The team is also simultaneously conducting a Title IX investigation into any potential Title IX violations led by Joel Bedelman. The findings from that phase of the investigation will take more time due to strict statutory due process requirements pursuant to Title IX. The board will be kept appraised of the status of the Title IX investigation and expects to have more information on the timing of that final report in the coming weeks. It's important to note that there is a specific legal framework that dictates that timeline. Like our community, the board is appalled by what has been alleged, and we are committed to answering the troubling questions that have been raised and finding a way forward for our staff, our students, and our families. The board will oversee these investigations and ensure that there is both accountability and systemic improvements. We will do this without taking our eyes off the core mission and purpose of teaching and learning. We know that there is considerable concern in our community about both the allegations and the investigation of those allegations. The board has heard your concerns and is committed to a thorough, fair, and transparent process that leads to a better and stronger school system. Our core purpose is to prepare every student to thrive in their future, and it is too important to do any less. And next Monday, the 23-24 school year will officially begin. Each new school year presents a world of opportunities and possibilities. There is so much joy. And that joy, that possibility, that opportunity is worth celebrating. While our two innovative calendar schools are already engaging students in learning, on August 28th, all of our students will be returning to begin another school year. How we engage them, How we prepare them is critical work. I will now turn to Dr. McKnight to talk about the opening of schools and what we're doing differently this year to ensure that students are in school, in the classroom, where they can truly benefit from instruction. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and for participating in our press conference today. Before I begin talking about the opening of school, I just want to echo a few comments that were just made by our board president. Recently, I sent out a video to all staff in Montgomery County Public Schools, and I sent that message, and in that message, I was reflecting on the fact that, I'm a woman, I'm a professional, I am a long-term learner within MCPS, and I'm a mother. And when I think about all of those roles, I too, like many others, were very disturbed when I read the Washington Post article. Absolutely. And I just want to reaffirm a few things I said in that video, and that is that sexual harassment, bullying, intimidation, retaliation, any of those types of things are intolerable. And they're intolerable because they actually detract from the very thing that we defined in our school system was most important coming out of the pandemic. And that was to have nurturing environments for everyone. And so I just want to reaffirm that because, as the board president said, we all take this very seriously. We will take the time to understand exactly what happened, especially as we reflect on the report. It indicated that issues may have stretched back years. It indicated that people may have felt like they had failed leadership. But all in all, what I want to reaffirm for our school system is that yesterday I had a chance to visit schools and I saw many, many excited and motivated staff who were happy to be back in places that they were welcome into, and that's their life's work, to invest in our children. And so that brings us back to why everything that we have to do to make sure those hearts and minds of the staff are fed so that they can be their absolute best for students. That's what we're going to do as a school system. That's my commitment to you. That's my commitment, as always, to our children and our students and to our families and to the Board of Education. So I want to commit that to any who may have questions. And also know that our team is going to be fully responsive and cooperative with the investigators. We want to know who, what, when, and why. And we're also going to make sure that we're doing everything to make them have the information, help them have the information that they need to give us those answers. And I want to say that through that process, anyone who is implicated in wrongdoing will be held accountable, period. This is serious. This is my life's work for children and families. And so that means we all accept accountability and responsibility when our environment is harmed. And that is what I intend to do. So I'm going to pull every lever, use every tool, and exercise every authority that I have as the superintendent, if necessary, to overhaul any part of our system that requires that. We must have safe and trusting environments, and that has to be a non-negotiable, and it will be a non-negotiable moving forward. And I just want to end this part of the conversation by saying our environments within a school system must always reflect what we want from our children. I share this often as a parent. I am teaching even when I am not intending to do so. I know I have a child who's very observant, and everybody who has a child know that they're always watching. And so every decision that we make, every step that we make, every word that we say, every action that we take teaches them a lesson in that moment. And I'm very aware of that. And so when I think about our school system, we have values that should always guide us to come back to that modeling, to that service, to children, to staff, and to families. And the values of MCPS must be held up to the highest integrity. And this situation cannot and will not be what defines us. I will always be a loyal daughter to MCPS. I will. I've spent 22 years here. And the MCPS that I know represents the best and brightest students. It represents the most dedicated staff. And it represents a community that has always upheld MCPS as one of its greatest assets. And so while we have much to learn and many things to do, I think it's important to remind us of that, because we always define who we are. So, as I think about our definition, I talked about yesterday, teachers came back, they were excited, and they're preparing. Some of them, believe it or not, on the first day that they came back, and I was going around doing school visits around noon, some of the classrooms were already put together for students on the first day. I actually had a few teachers send me pictures last night because they wanted me to see their completed classrooms prepared for their students. That's the first day back. So see, our teachers know how important it is for those bulletin boards to be perfect, for those wellness corners to exist, to make sure that students know the things that reaffirm them as they come into the room, whether it may be a poster with a quote on it, whether it's the diversity that represents culture, religion, all of those things. Our staff take all of those things into consideration. So I am grateful that our children are going to be walking into many of those classrooms that I had a chance to see yesterday on the first day back. I can only imagine what's going to happen between now and Friday, given that type of commitment to our staff. And today we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we're going to talk about a topic that we really grappled with a lot, which was attendance last year and coming out of the pandemic. But first, I actually want to begin by sharing some good news with you, because this summer we've had an opportunity to reflect and do much work, and we really take a lot of time to look at data to see what improvements we've been able to make over the entire school year, because that then dictates a lot of our goals and work for the next year, which is where we are now. The first thing I'm going to share is that I am really happy to say that we are nearly fully staffed for teachers, and we are fully staffed for bus drivers. Last year, yes, I think that deserves an applause. This is a significant accomplishment. Last year, in many ways, we were crippled because of the transportation issues and just the need to hire bus drivers when that was the need for every single school system in our surrounding area. But this year, not only are we fully staffed, we have a bench of drivers who are ready to get in and step in if anything happens and a bus driver is unable to fulfill their route. So we're really thrilled about that. We're also opening up a brand new school, Cabin Branch Elementary School in Clarksburg. I've spoken to Principal Dinga, who is filled with energy and excitement that she is translating to her staff, and they will be ready to open up, and they are celebrating their new school and excited about it. We've also seen much ongoing work in our key foundational skills of mathematics and literacy for our students. So in many of our assessments that we were able to measure from the beginning of last year to the end of last year, we saw some really impressive rising scores in literacy for our students, particularly in grades K through 2. And that's important because we look at one of our academic milestones of where our students by grade 3 in reading. And I'm proud to tell you, in kindergarten, our students' performance rose by 24% last year. 24%. For our first grade students, rose by 17%. And for our second grade students by 10%. I share those percentages with you because we know when there is a large, strong foundation for literacy in our early learners, we're trying to close less gaps as they progress in their later years within our classrooms, and so I am thrilled about that. This year, we also have implemented our budget-supported math coaches in our middle schools, And we are excited, and we've been working with them in professional learning so that they're prepared to build partnerships with our teachers in our buildings and work with them in their classrooms to focus on our middle school students in the areas of mathematics specifically. We have our budget-supported athletic trainers who are now working with our student athletes to ensure high levels of physical safety for our students as we encourage them to continue to go out and participate in extracurricular activities. And we have Dr. Sullivan here in this same room on Friday. We hosted our athletic directors, many of our police partners from many municipalities within the school district, our principals, and we came together and we talked about partnership and how that is just really the core foundation of how we're able to build these systems of safety for our students. So we're excited about that. And of course, our pathway for student success in college, career, and community readiness. So I call that our roadmap for families and students that indicates the key milestones that we want them to be aware of so that we can monitor our students' progression. And the pathway does identify critical competencies as well, and we've talked about the importance of those experiences that we want students to have that marries up to the academic milestones, so when they leave us, they're college, career, and community ready. So for our community members, as you go out and you receive service in your communities, and some of our students are working while they're in high school, and even when they finish, we all want good service, and we want great interactions with those who are providing service in our community. Well, that's what those competencies are all about. And I'm excited that we will be able to create those experiences for students this coming year as we implement the pathways. And finally, today we're going to talk about the attendance action plan. So Montgomery County Public Schools, like many other school systems across the nation, really have struggled with attendance since the pandemic. So if you were to think about it in the most simplistic way, for almost 2 years, we said to our students and to our families and to our entire community, if you cough, if you sneeze, if you may look like you have a runny nose, you should stay at home and away from others. And that was important during the pandemic, very important. Actually, it was one of the things that kept us safe and allowed us to eliminate spread at great measures. But we're in a different place now. And so we're going to have to transform our thinking about how important it is to be in school, to engage, and it's our responsibility to create those environments in which students want to be there, and they are engaged, and they're excited to be there. But much transformation has to happen to recalculate our thinking and to change minds and hearts about the importance of being in school, in the classroom, and having that personal interaction. Because of the data that I shared with you, that's a perfect example of when we have our students in the classroom, in person, in environments in which they can learn and thrive, that is when they're able to make the most accomplishments in the most meaningful way to their academic success. So today we're going to talk about that comprehensive plan and how it's been focused to aim more engagement with families. So that if students are struggling with attendance and coming to school, we want to know what those issues are so that we can not only work with the students, but work with the families to help them support students in being present and engaged in our schools. So I want to thank our team for all the work that you've done to help improve and to help us develop a focus around attendance and help improve those conditions so that our students can be engaged and in our schools and in our classrooms. So at this point, as I share my gratitude, I'd like to invite Mr. Damon Monteleone, our Associate Superintendent in the Office of School Support and Wellbeing, who will give us all the details about our attendance action plan coming up this year. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. McKnight. And thank you for this opportunity to share the approach we are taking to address a problem facing schools across the country, the cultural shift in the way people are thinking about attendance. And though attendance rates were gradually declining prior to 2020, one of the lasting effects of the pandemic has been its impact on student attendance. Nationally, data released from the 2021-2022 school year suggests that chronic absenteeism rates have at least doubled compared to those before the pandemic. And in the United States, 1 in 3 students is chronically absent, which is defined by missing more than 10% of school. Beyond the shift in attitudes caused by the pandemic, we know there are a confluence of factors that impact this issue. First, the youth mental health crisis, to which MCPS has invested significant resources, staffing, and supports. Second, the fact that some of our students do not see themselves in their school community. They may not feel welcome, and they may not have a sense of belonging. And through our work with our anti-racist audit action plan, we are addressing this. And for many secondary students, a 7-period day, sitting in 45-minute classes, feels disengaging. The day-to-day student experience for many has not changed really in over 100 years, certainly not since I was in school, and probably many of you sitting here in the audience. So we are asking our students in 2023 to learn in an environment unlike any other they engage in, and unlike any environment in which they will work or experience college or the military. And for some students, unfortunately, going to school is a luxury and may involve choosing between learning or supporting their family. Next slide, please. And yet we know the importance of being physically present in school. According to research by Attendance Works, absenteeism in the first month of school can predict poor attendance throughout the year. In fact, 50% of students who miss between just 2 and 4 days in the month of September will ultimately miss a month of school or more. And poor attendance can influence whether a student reads proficiently by the end of 3rd grade, which is why MCPS is using research-based measures for 3rd grade literacy as part of our pathway to success. And by 6th grade, chronic absenteeism becomes a leading indicator that a student will drop out of high school. And finally, students who live in communities with high levels of poverty are 4 times more likely to be chronically absent than others, often for reasons beyond their control. As the data indicates, we have seen significant increases as compared to the pre-pandemic levels. In 2018-19, the last interrupted school year before the COVID pandemic, over 30,000 students were chronically absent, or roughly 20%. This past school year, there were 42,863 chronically absent students, or 27%. Next slide, please. Though we see increases across the board, there was roughly a 16% rise at the high school level and 14% in pre-K. And we know the pandemic shifted how secondary students learn as content, materials, and assignments moved out of the classroom and to online platforms. Anybody who had a teenage son or daughter or student at MCPS witnessed that firsthand. And this has shifted how our secondary students are perceiving how they learn and ways to learn and the value of being present in classrooms. And the pre-K numbers are also concerning, because they are potentially the start of a bad attendance habit. But yet, it should be noted that pre-K attendance is not compulsory, not until kindergarten. Next slide. As alluded to earlier, we know the pandemic had its greatest impact on our most vulnerable families. And there is a clear correlation, as you can see, between financial insecurity and attendance rates. Students with free and reduced meals designation, or FARMs, have higher rates of chronic absenteeism. And additionally, we know we must do a better job of engaging our Hispanic community. In a moment, you'll hear some of the details of our comprehensive approach that we're taking to address this, which is rooted in 3 main pillars. First, a quantitative and qualitative root cause analysis of why students aren't coming to school, who's not coming to school, what time of day they're not coming to school, and how we can get to that root cause to intervene. Second, a school-based data-driven planning, monitoring, and student intervention system. We are enhancing our student well-being teams and using newly created data systems to monitor data in real time. And third, our district-wide structures, supports, and initiatives, such as the launch of the attendance campaign, which we'll be bringing to you very soon. And so now I'll turn it over to Mr. Neff, Director of Pupil, Personnel, and Attendance Services.
So good morning. I'm happy to be with you. Next slide, please. So it starts with the attendance campaign. All together now, in school together, attend together, learn together. This speaks to the importance of MCPS's efforts to make schools engaging and welcoming for all families, and I emphasize all families, and our responsibility to help families send their children to school every day. Immediate efforts during the 23-24 school year will include all schools are focusing on school culture and climate and student well-being goals in their school improvement efforts because both have a direct impact on student attendance. School teams will look at a variety of data points related to how their school and classroom climate and culture impact attendance. Each school will develop a specific plan for how they analyze student data, engage with parents, and provide support to remove barriers to attendance. Student well-being teams, as Mr. Monteleone mentioned, will continue to support attendance and will be using a new online platform that will allow us to document and monitor our efforts. MCPS is working with national experts on attendance, including Attendance Works and Everyday Labs, to enhance best practices to improve student attendance. There are many MCPS staff members, in addition to community partners, who are here to support families in these efforts. These include administrators, school counselors, pupil personnel workers who will lead their school's attendance efforts, social workers, parent community coordinators who have the linguistic and cultural expertise to meaningfully engage with parents, and counselors who are dedicated to working with newcomer students and families. Many of these mental health staff members have been newly hired or increased because of the impact of the pandemic, and all will be working in a cohesive manner to address student attendance issues. The state's attorney's office's truancy prevention program continues in partnership with MCPS. This model involves a 10-week program of positive and encouraging feedback to students, including mentoring, and will be increasing to 20 middle schools and 1 high school for the 23-24 school year. We thank Mr. McCarthy for the ongoing partnership between the state's attorney's office and MCPS. We also enjoy partnerships with our DHHS colleagues, including programs such as Linkages to Learning, Bridge to Wellness, and the Wellness Centers. We thank them as well for their partnership.
So I want to emphasize what Mr. Neff shared is what is immediately within our control. Analyzing the data, enhancing accountability, enhancing reporting structures, engaging students and family and understanding the root causes and what they're experiencing in the community, directly supporting students and intervening on their behalf with the staff that Mr. Neff shared. However, this is ongoing work, and this is the first step. We know this will take time, and there is not one simple solution. MCPS has a commitment to look at anything and everything that could potentially negatively impact attendance. So over the course of this year, we will focus on innovative thinking to help reshape the paradigm of teaching and learning. This includes, but is not limited to, assessing all of our policies, including the grading and reporting policy, our course offerings, as well as alternative ways to offer instruction that meets the needs of students who may not be available during that traditional 7-period day. And finally, the work of the Anti-Racist Action Plan is ongoing and driving us to deeply examine the experiences our students have in our schools as we seek to ensure all students feel warm, welcome, included, and engaged in their learning environments. I now welcome Ms. Elba Garcia.
Thank you, Damon, and good morning. Muy buenos días. I am Elba Garcia, the Senior Community Advisor for Montgomery County Public Schools. Every single hour of instruction makes a difference for kids. Let me say that again. Every single hour of instruction makes a difference for kids. This is especially important for Black and brown students. I want to make sure that our families understand that we must have their children in our seats every single day, starting on the first day of school on Monday, August 28th, and every day after. We are partners in this work. We know that good attendance increases academic performance. I am a mother of 3, and I understand our mornings are busy. in my house, and I'm sure in your houses, and we experience this in very different ways. In addition, our kids are facing new challenges after the pandemic. But as partners and engaged families, we must ensure that our kids are in school. That is the only way we will reach the academic goals that we want for all of our students. Taking my kids to school every day is how I partner with my schools. So together, we can ensure that my children can earn the skills and experiences they need to be successful in whatever comes after they graduate from Montgomery County Public Schools, whether it is to pursue college, career, or being a good community member. I want this for you too. A new school year means a new beginning, new adventures, and new learning. We at MCPS will do our part. As you just heard, we are committed to ensuring that students and families have MCPS staff and community partners that can meaningfully engage and support them every day. As part of our ongoing work, MCPS will engage parents, students, and community members as we explore options for innovation and non-traditional ways for students to access courses and earn credits. Additionally, parents are key members of the current grading and reporting workgroup. If we do our part, and you do your part, we can all learn and achieve. When we partner together, we can make a difference. Todos juntos ahora, all together now. And I'm turning it back to Mr. Cram.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. We'll now take questions from the media for any of the speakers that you've heard from today. So are there any questions at this time? Susan. Go ahead.
Either for the superintendent or Sylvester.
Mhm.
Are we is there any concern, you probably heard the public is not happy with it, or don't think it's shows in the law firm doing the investigation is going to be fair? Do you have any comments on that? Are you concerned about that?
We acknowledge the concerns of the community and are taking that very seriously, that concern very seriously. The full board has met with the law firm, and we are confident that they can undertake a fair and independent process, again, reporting exclusively to the Board of Education in the coming months.
Kate.
Follow-up question in that vein. The law firm that's been hired is known as being management favorable, very strong for managers who want to investigate this. And I think some of the teachers are feeling that, while you all say you want to get to the bottom of what went wrong, where the things went off the rails, their message is, we told you. We already gave you the information you need. How do you respond to those concerns among the teachers that have to go into classes next week?
Yeah, I recognize that there have been many complaints filed on behalf of our staff to the school system, and that's the purpose of this entire investigation, is to get to the bottom of why the system failed to address their complaints that were filed formally. So I acknowledge those requests, and we are going to get to the bottom of this.
And a follow-up on the absenteeism. Prior to the pandemic, I see that there was 19.5%, nearly 20%. What is being done now that's different, and how do you expect that to work? I think a lot of people would say 20% was alarming. What were you doing back then?
Sure, certainly, and as was mentioned, as a former high school principal, we did see some declining rates, gradually declining rates prior to the pandemic. I think what we're talking about now is we have new data platforms that have been put into place that are providing real-time data that is accessible and actionable for school-based teams. Beyond that, during the pandemic, we started the formation of student well-being teams. And at their inception, right, they were created to literally find students who weren't logging in, ensure they had the resources they needed. These teams have evolved. So they are more tightly organized and aligned and have a variety of members on them, including administrators and some of the staff that Mr. Neff spoke to. These teams are looking at real-time attendance data on a biweekly basis. We're looking at this year, for the first time, we are including attendance data as part of our school improvement planning process. Historically, schools, accountability for schools, and looking at data has revolved largely around academic data. So we know, coming out of the pandemic and this year with the opportunity to implement that new school improvement plan, that it was important to highlight attendance as a data point and as a goal for individual schools. So in sum, we have tightened our structures and processes, we have new data reporting pieces in place, and we are expanding the role of our individual staff who work specifically with our students. So to speak a little bit about those staff and what the school student well-being teams do, I'd like Mr. Neff to share that.
Thank you. So the only thing I would add to that is many of the staff members that I mentioned are newly hired recently as a result of the pandemic that are part of the collaborative process. I'm thinking about social workers. I'm thinking about increase in parent community coordinators and ETCs in schools. All of those staff members are working together. The other piece that I would say is important is, in addition to doing collaborative problem solving through attendance committees and through student well-being teams on individual students and families that are struggling with attendance, we're asking schools to look at their disaggregated data and within their school community to think about what are their racial groups, are there grade levels, are there service groups, are there certain parts of their community that are struggling with attendance, and if so, what are some proactive interventions and preventative measures that can be put into place to not only go student by student and family by family, but to look in the broader context to address attendance issues.
If I can follow up, I know the state's attorney's office has worked very closely with you on a program to get kids on track as a team to kind of provide wraparound support for students. Do you have any data on how well that's doing, and is there a common thread? What are the kids telling you? I know we're talking about data here and numbers, but when they talk to you and their families, what are they telling you?
So thank you. So the program that you're mentioning is the truancy prevention program. That's what I mentioned in my comments. And I don't have it in front of me. They do have data that they regularly schedule with the county. They regularly present to the county council to share information about their program. And as I mentioned in my comments, that program is a weekly touch base with the student that includes mentoring. And it's just a short-term encouragement. Let's set goals for next week. How did you do last week? There are rewards built in. And it's the way that we want to be addressing attendance throughout MCPS in terms of encouraging and how can we help kind of questions. And to answer your question about what students are telling us, they're telling us a variety of things. One is many of students are telling us, and Mr. Montaglione mentioned this, that they have family responsibilities. They have to take care of younger siblings. They might have to work. We also have students telling us that sometimes they don't see themselves in what they're learning. And some of our students are telling us that they don't feel welcomed or recognized. Also, students are simply telling us that the pandemic was hard. And as Dr. McKnight said, it was 2 years almost where most students were staying home. And we met with focus groups, and I can think of a focus group at Rockville High School where they just said, like, it's hard to come back. We got comfortable. We were sitting in our beds. You know, we were in our pajamas taking our classes, and it is just hard to come back. And so that's the mental health component, that's the engagement component. Those are the kinds of things that we want to continue to try to work on as we're making our school culture and climate more welcoming and engaging.
Yes.
I think you've already had them. They sent them out Friday as well. They're boasting improvement in English language arts, not so much in math.
Right.
Your system's better than most. Some are really struggling. What should people make of the MCAP report as it is now out? And I suppose attendance is a large part of that.
Oh, absolutely. Great question. So attendance is a big part of that because, again, I mentioned earlier when our students are in the classrooms and they are engaging, then that's the best space for them to learn. If they are not, then that's learning that they don't have access to. So the two absolutely have a correlation. Overall, the MCAP scores are important because they do show a measure and one that we can look at that is comparative to how other LEAs are doing across the state of Maryland for public education. But in MCPS, we always go back to how we must look at multiple measures, right? So the MCAP results represents one measure that we use, and again, all other school systems use that in the state of Maryland. But we also go back to many of those internal measures that we look at, which is why our platform really does build in those internal and external data points so that we can have a true picture of who our learners are. And that is the biggest commitment we make to our community and to our students. We want you to see yourself in multiple fashions. When you take an MCAP assessment, that could be a day or a week that just happens to be a bad day or a week for you. We need to know how to measure your learning, your engagement, from a much broader perspective. And so that's why multiple measures is absolutely key that we commit to. But again, we value MCAP and often look at ourselves in terms of how we measure up to other systems.
Statewide, eighth grade math is really bad.
Right.
What's that all about?
So it's about, I'll again share this with you in the most simplistic terms. So if you were to go back when we were all learning mathematics, I compared learning mathematics to building blocks. If you have Legos, you have to connect one to the other in order to get a finished product. Mathematics, the actual subject and content of mathematics is just in that way. Place value, you have to know place value before you can add, subtract, divide. Place value still comes back up in any type of mathematics problems that you can come up with. So when our children had interrupted learning as a result of the pandemic and learning online, where they had to do a lot of that independently, right? And there may not be that teacher looking over their shoulder to see how they got to the answer. We have to take all of those things into consideration when we say, now, here we are, and the mathematics, MCAP data and other measures have shown us, we took a hard hit in mathematics. But we've been talking about that since last year. We didn't wait until the MCAP scores to give us a summative assessment. We knew that mathematics was an issue last October, in the fall. So this year, I'm excited about the fact that we have math coaches. We came up with a solution to that. We know that we needed to provide our teachers with more opportunity to work specifically with a coach around mathematics who would also spend time at Central, but in the classroom with that teacher and their students, so that you have many eyes on students watching. How did you come to that answer? Explain to me your work, or to see how the students go about the solving problem process to identify where was there a lack of understanding so that we can deal with that skill so that they can ultimately master the skill we're trying to teach. That is what happens in the classroom with teachers and the coach and any other resources that we provide to make that shift that we need to make in mathematics. So I feel confident in the solutions that we've come up with. So I expect that next year, this time, when I'm standing and giving you the report, and I was able to boast on some of the gains we've been able to make in literacy because of the resources that we put in place, that I'll be able to share the same in terms of improvements that we're making in mathematics. But you won't have to wait until next year. We'll actually be able to give you some of those updates throughout the year.
One more item before another question, Kate. I wanted to offer one more thing related to your question earlier about attendance that wasn't mentioned just then, but the outreach plan. Specific, frequent outreach to our families about the importance of attendance. It starts today with a message to all families in multiple languages. We'll be taking that message to our back to school fair this weekend. There are videos in development. There are posters already in schools, flyers in development, and we're going to be doing that message, carrying that message to our family throughout the years. Any other questions? Nicole?
Hi, yeah, specifically, I have a few on student attendance. One of the first ones, I'm glad that you guys delineated what's different now, but can you set the foundation a little of what this looked like before the pandemic? Like what initiatives you were taking, whether you were calling home to parents, et cetera, for starters, and then I have more.
Sure. So it's really evolving, and it has evolved. Briefly, there was a history in Montgomery County, as in many other school districts, where a final grade was tied to attendance. So I've been in this system a long time, and in the early 2000s, we had what was called an LC policy, or a loss of credit policy. So students who missed 10% of, I think it was actually 10 days at that time, it goes back 20-some years, could potentially lose credit in that course, regardless of whether they had straight A's and had never, only gotten A's on all of their assessments. That was modified about 10 years ago or so to what we called an E3 policy, right? So what this was, again, was a little bit softer version of that LC. The loss of credit policy largely rested in the hands of the individual teacher to account for and to implement. The E3 policy was more of a school-based approach where students were informed and parents were informed if they had 3 unexcused absences or 5 unexcused absences. They were then put on an attendance intervention plan and given some supplemental academic work to do to show that they met credit. Those students who went through that program and earned that credit would then recoup the grade in the course. What we found over time was that whole process was highly variable. And to be straight, there were some schools that were doing it with fidelity. There were some schools that were not doing it with fidelity. We also saw that the impact of this policy largely fell in certain pockets of our school community as opposed to other pockets of our school community. And because of the varied nature of this and the varied experience, and we are always trying to decrease variability in MCPS, that really started, we were starting before the pandemic to rethink our approach. And I know a lot of the narrative out there is about student accountability with attendance, and I know that some of the subtext is around the grading and reporting policy. As I mentioned, we will be addressing that and talking about that with our stakeholders through the grading and reporting work group. But then, of course, the pandemic hit. And so one thing I just can't emphasize enough as a high school principal during the pandemic and as a parent with 2 teenagers in my house while I was principaling, they were learning, right, is that we completely shifted our expectations for students. And I think, as Dr. McKnight alluded to, in the right way. We erred on the side of students. We made sure that they had enough to eat. We made sure that they had internet connection and all the technology they needed. Our student well-being teams were out there literally finding all the necessities for our students. We really had a subset of a generation of students that came of age, right, with this environment as their learning environment. So that's a little bit of the history. I think one of the things that I also want to speak to is kind of, I spoke earlier about the student well-being team, right? This sounds very, edu-speak. Just let me walk you through a little bit of a scenario here. A multi-stakeholder group of staff come together bi-weekly. They are looking at wellness data points, attendance data points, referrals from students. It could be any number of things outside of academics, which ultimately impact academics. Attendance is one of them. So as those teams are looking at data across the board by student group and individual, they are identifying students, individual students this year for individual student interventions, which may be therapeutic sessions with a social worker. It may be the parent community coordinator ensuring that the family has resources. It may be that the student is going to be referred to one of our Bridge to Wellness programs that we partner with HHS on. There are a litany of resources in schools and data systems where we are monitoring in real time, and we are going to be tracking this through our structural changes at the district level through our school improvement planning process. So folks from my team, folks from the school supervisory side are looking at this data in real time together. We are looking at schools where we see trends, and we are pinpointing our interventions at the school level. So that's a little bit of the evolution.
And that was super helpful. One of the other things that I wanted to ask about with this is, I'm glad that you elaborated on sort of the student demographic groups that you want to focus on. Are there any specific grade levels in particular that you're worried about? Or are you seeing this just like every grade level across the district needs more of the focus? And also, is there an expected cost for any of this?
As of right now, we are. I can't speak necessarily to cost. We're partnering with Attendance Works and Everyday Labs. There may be a cost associated with that, but very minimal, and I don't have that information in front of me. I think in terms of some of the grades, you saw that in the data, and Mr. Neff can speak, but I think we really need to figure out ways to engage with our high school students. And that is why some of our high school students, it may take more time, because we've got, as I alluded to, we've got to figure out ways to engage our high school students outside of that traditional setting. Beyond that, our focus through the campaign and other measures is preventative communication outreach to our primary grade levels and our elementary students. And I think the shift from 5th grade to 6th grade is a key transition. The shift from 8th grade to 9th grade is a key transition. You can look at attendance patterns and GPA of a student over their first semester of 9th grade. It largely does not change after that first semester. So we are proactive. I can say this past summer, we shared information and data, instruction and processes to all of our high schools so that they were looking at proactive data of the students walking into their buildings before they got there from 8th grade, having meetings with parents and students at the 9th grade level with counselors and administrators, where we saw spotty attendance patterns in middle school to get in front of this issue. So I think transition grades, the primary grades, and certainly constantly with that high school level.
Nicole, go ahead.
Yeah, and I had one question kind of on this Jackson Lewis hiring and Dr. Weidelman. I wanted to ask specifically, you'd mentioned that there's two kind of scopes here with Jackson Lewis. One is Title IX possible violations. Some of the complaints, as you addressed, involved workplace bullying as well and retaliation. So where sort of are those allegations fitting into Jackson Lewis's scopes? Like, is that more in the first investigative report or the latter around Title IX?
It's more involved, the first phase is really about the appointment, strictly about how that came to be. So that, your question would be covered under the second phase of the investigation.
Thank you. Any other questions? Kate, yes, go ahead, and then we'll come to you, Al.
Final, and it's gonna sound silly, but can we get the definitive pronouncer on Dr. Weidelman's name? I've heard two different pronunciations.
It is that.
It is Weidelman.
Yeah.
Hey, I understand that yesterday, Councilmember Don Lepke and Council President Evan Glass submitted a letter to the State Inspector General for Education and the County Inspector General asking for them to conduct their own probe into the Weidelman allegations. And if that request was granted, they also asked the school board and superintendent to halt the Jackson Lewis investigation. If that moved forward, would you comply with that request, and any additional comments on that letter?
Thank you for the question. It is ultimately the Board of Education's decision, but we welcome the collaboration. I have been in contact with the county IG, and I look forward to continuing that conversation with her about how she can contribute based on her purview of her scope of work to contribute to the investigation. So we welcome the support of the IG, and like I said, we have already started the conversations, and we will continue. The purpose is to get to the bottom of this.
And then I had a question on the absenteeism. When is MCPS telling teachers to mark students as absent versus tardy? Is there a policy specific to that? Is that school-based?
So thank you for the question. That is actually dictated by the state. And so MSDE uses a 10% and 50% threshold. So if a student is present greater than 10% of a class period, but less than 50%, they are considered there for a partial period. So they are in effect tardy for the period. If they are there for greater than 50% of the period, they are considered present for that period.
And then what public feedback has been used to create this action plan?
So over the course of last year, we started working on this, I think probably really looking at the data as we came out of 21-22 in September and October over the course of the first marking period, and worked together with a variety of stakeholders, students, staff, teachers, and we really didn't, we solicited themes, right? And we asked, like, what are some themes that need to be addressed? It wasn't like we had this plan and said, react to this plan. What are some things that need to be included? Where can we get better? What are really the long-term kind of existential issues around this that we need to address? And certainly we heard from many of our folks and our students and parents about looking at some of the grading reporting pieces, but also looking at the resources that are available to students, because we also heard people don't know what's available to them. So This started, and it wasn't like we had one big meeting or two big meetings. There were a series of input groups with internal stakeholders. And then as we meet with our community advocates and leaders throughout the year, we're constantly asking questions about a variety of things and getting input. So there were a variety of settings, and I could go through those settings, but it was a long conversation. And again, it was a proactive outreach to get themes, ideas, beyond just, hey, here's our plan, and what do you think about it?
And then one last question on the plan. You mentioned that it will also include assessing grading reporting policies. Will that include the 50% rule?
So the grading reporting policy work group is a work group that is being conducted by our colleagues in curriculum and instruction. And my understanding is that they are going to be looking at all aspects of grading and reporting, which I know may include, right, some of the things that we've heard about at the secondary level along those lines. So it's all grading reporting components within the policy.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, are there any other questions? We are at an hour. If there are no further questions, thank you for coming today.